My name is Ariana Figueroa, and I am the health coach for Integrative Family Medicine of Asheville. And I am here to present a PowerPoint presentation on reducing plastic use. This was used in the community brainstorm that we had. However, some of the attendees to that brainstorm did not want to be recorded. This talk came about because one of the members of our practice asked for it, and we agreed that it was a fantastic idea. We see the environment and human health as inexorably intertwined, and especially for a topic like plastic use, it felt pertinent and useful for all of us to come together and try and come up with some ideas, some tactics, some strategies for reducing our impact on our environment while learning a little bit about the impact that plastic has on the environment and on our health. And so the results of that talk are going to be typed up into a PDF that will be uploaded to our website, www.integrativeasheville.org, and that will be on our community class portion of our website, along with this PowerPoint presentation and this recording. So the resources that we came up with from our brainstorm will be available. We're just going to keep the actual conversation private. I personally think that the health coaching model of approaching a desire for change, assessing where we are now and where we want to be, and then going from that big overwhelming feeling of there's just so much that needs to change and breaking it down into, well, this is what is within my control, and here are the steps I'm going to take, and here's my goal, and here's how I'm tracking my progress. I feel like that's actually really applicable to the environment, to a desire for changing lifestyles such as to reduce impact for the environment. Ultimately, plastic use requires a series of habits where we are dependent, or we are using, in the habit of using plastic Ziploc bags, plastic trash bags, and all other forms of plastic. And so changing those habits, that's where I feel like the health coaching model can be really helpful. So again, in health coaching, we begin with a vision of where we want to be, and then we assess, where are we now? Why is it important to me personally to make this change? What does it look like for me if I continue exactly as I am now, making no changes in my plastic use 10 years from now? How do I feel about that? What does it look like if 10 years from now I've made significant changes? And regardless of what's happening, around me, I know that I have made these changes. How will I feel in 10 years? And then bringing a focus. So deciding, okay, in this area of my life, I will make these changes. And I'm setting this goal that is specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, and has a time frame. And then I'm tracking it in some way, with people, with an app, with a calendar, but I'm in some way bringing accountability to the action I do or don't take. And then when I meet my goal, I come back to the vision. Okay, now where am I at? What do I want to do next? So that's ultimately why I, as a health coach, am moderating this talk, because I wanted to take the work I do with one-on-one with people and see what it could do with a group for a topic of this nature that I personally feel very passionate about. I thought it would be really helpful to start the conversation off by just acknowledging the ways in which plastic is good and has helped us as a species and as a culture. So plastic is versatile, it's cheap, it takes very little energy to produce, and that's part of why it's become such a big part of our culture in such a relatively short time. 100 years ago, plastic wasn't really out there. We also use it in healthcare for IV lines, IV bags, for knee and joint replacements, for sterile packaging, for gloves. And so in terms of sanitation and providing health care that is in large part working to prevent the conveyance of bacteria and of viruses, it's been a huge help to our society. And the cons: it doesn't come without toxicity. Human and animal exposure to endocrine disrupting bisphenol A, or BPA, and di-2-ethylhexylphthalate, DEHP, creates problems in terms of toxicity to the liver, and that's not even including the problems that are centered just around the sheer enormity of plastic that we have. So trash, impact to marine environments, and depletion of non-renewable petroleum resources, where we're looking at the actual oil and gas that goes into manufacturing the plastic that's made. And then the volume of plastic that's used and then discarded and then doesn't break down And so we just have piles of it in our oceans, in our environment. So this was a really telling number for me personally. We have produced 8.3 billion tons of plastic since the 1950s. That's less than 100 years. And the thing is that every piece of plastic ever created still exists right now in the environment. It doesn't go away. Sometimes we can recycle, but some forms of plastic aren't recyclable. And so it's just out there. That was something that was really helpful for me. And I think that, as I began doing my research for this presentation and for this conversation, it was helpful for me to look at 8.3 billion tons since the 1950s, 2, plastic is still out there, and 3, 50% of our plastic use is single-use plastics. So, bits of plastic like the flossers, the single-use flossers, bottle caps, Bic lighters, not single-use, but also not reusable once you finish using them. The bags that we use for groceries, for storing food, the to-go containers from leaving a restaurant or from getting a drink at a coffee shop. On average, a piece of plastic is used or has use for about 12 minutes, and then it's done. And so, if we kind of take a step back from there and look at, okay, that's how much we've produced since the 1950s, and 50% of it's single use. We're using it on average 12 minutes, per item. And it takes 63 billion gallons of oil to supply just the United States, just with water bottles. So 63 billion gallons of oil, and I believe that's per year, to provide the United States with the amount of water bottles we use in 1 year. 63 billion gallons of oil to produce the plastic just for water bottles, just for the United States for 1 year. So in terms of environmental impact, we also need to look at the fossil fuels that go into producing these single-use plastics, which we don't use for very long, many of them, and which then end up on our beaches and in our oceans. There are an estimated 5.25 trillion individual plastic particles, or 269,000 tons of plastic, floating on or near just the ocean's surface. So that doesn't include the tiny little bits that have sunk down to the ocean bottom. It doesn't include the bits of ocean that are in the landfills or on the beaches. It's just along the upper layer of the ocean. This is another interesting fact that really struck me. Plastics soak up pollutants from the surrounding water. So when there's a piece of plastic in the ocean, it attracts the chemicals that are in the water surrounding it. And those chemicals, if they're toxic, are concentrated up to 1 million times in that piece of plastic. So that plastic toxins, 1 million times stronger than in the surrounding water. Now, if a small fish or shrimp or small marine critter eats that bit of plastic, which often they do, because plastic for some reason smells really appetizing to small fish and to little marine critters, even though it's not digestible and non-nutritive, they eat that bit of plastic. And then whatever toxins were in the plastic get concentrated in the tissues of that fish or that critter. And then if a bigger fish comes along and eats that critter, the toxins are concentrated in the tissues or liver of that fish. And then if a person eats that fish, we take that in as well. Only 9% of plastics are recycled. That's another fact that struck me, because it's much less than I thought. 79% of plastics are thrown away, and the rest are incinerated. So this also is just personally very, very impactful. When we begin to look at how long it takes for the plastic we use on a daily basis to degrade, and we begin to think about the items we use for our self-care, for drinking, for just as we go through our daily lives, not as the tools that they are to us, but as a material, and put that material into the context of how long it takes to degrade, it changes. For me personally, before this talk, I often struggled to remember that a plastic toothbrush, is plastic. Usually I would think of it for its function. This is the toothbrush I'm using to brush my teeth. This is the pen I'm using to write. With things like plastic bags, for me personally, they were more obviously plastic. There's kind of a sense of responsibility and of awareness around a plastic bag as being a plastic thing that a turtle might mistake for a jellyfish. For me personally, a toothbrush was not as, I hadn't been tracking it as much. So this helped me to contextualize it. I hope it helps you as well. A toothbrush, a plastic toothbrush, takes 500 years to disappear. For 500 years, the plastic toothbrushes that we've been using in our lifetimes are still going to be around. Disposable diapers, 500 years. Plastic cup, 450 years. Coffee pods, like from a Keurig machine, 500 years. Plastic water bottles, 450 years to degrade and to disappear from our environment. So in plastic bags, 20 years. Straws, 200 years, that's all right there. But that's, again, really helpful. These pieces don't go away. And there's this great quote from Jane Goodall: you cannot get through a single day without having an impact on the world around you. What you do makes a difference, and you have to decide what kind of a difference you want to make. There are some pictures at the bottom of this screen. Entanglement is another big issue with plastic from netting, from fish nets, and from, I think mainly from fish nets. There are some 25 species, I think, in the United States alone that are at severe risk with entanglement. And again, those plastic pieces that don't go away. So there's a map on the bottom right here that shows Henderson Island, which is an uninhabited island in the middle of the Pacific Ocean. No one lives there. And yet, there is a lot of trash that has washed up on the beaches of that island. And this is a hermit crab that's in a plastic Avon makeup bottle, using it as a shell. This beach has, I believe, 32 million pieces of trash along it. And the reason for that, even though it's uninhabited, is that the ocean currents that kind of circle around in different areas along the Pacific Ocean and Atlantic, they're called gears, G-Y-R-E-S, gears. And those currents pick up trash and concentrate them in specific areas. And so the trash from countries, hundreds, thousands of miles away can concentrate on this uninhabited island in the middle of the Pacific. And I think, again, there's often a sense of, even if you recycle and you're being intentional with how you use plastic, we don't always see the impact of the plastic we use because it goes away. And we don't see it. And so I think that looking at the facts is really helpful. Now, I led our group that we brainstormed together, the community brainstorm group, through a little exercise before we started talking. And this came from my training at Duke Integrative Medicine. And the idea is that you get out a sheet of paper and a pen, and you write down the first thing that comes to mind when I say the word color, when I say a piece of furniture, and when I say flower. And the reason that I did this is because two-thirds of the people that I do this exercise with will usually say red or blue for color, bed or couch for furniture, daisy or rose for flower. And a third won't. They'll have to put down something else. But usually two-thirds put down one of those two options. And that's instructive to realize that even when most of us believe that we're thinking independently and uniquely, we share a certain cultural connotation to words, a certain cultural bias, a certain cultural understanding, such that sometimes we think that we're saying the same thing. But what gets really interesting is, am I thinking of the same color blue as you? Is your red the same as my red? And the answer to that is, of course not. It's a different shade. It has complete different emotional connotations. And so if we look at that and we take a step back for a conversation about plastic use and changing our lifestyles and changing our habits, my solution might not be your solution. And I think that's important to acknowledge before having a brainstorm, just to kind of set the tone of, this might be a conversation that's triggering for some people, and how can we move through that with respect, kindness, curiosity, creativity, patience, and the understanding that we're all in a different place in our lives. We all have different resources available to us. And so what we can do will be different. That doesn't mean that collectively we can't make change happen. So this is where I led the group through an exercise to just list down all the different ways in which they use plastic that are within their control to change. So probably not going to change the hospital system or the medical system's use of plastic for sterile packaging, etc. However, we can look at all the ways that we as consumers use plastic on a daily basis. the bags to carry produce at the grocery store, trash bags, razors, Q-tips, another single-use plastic item, shampoo and conditioners, phone cases, floss containers, to-go containers, single-use drink containers, etc. And we can begin to think about other products that we could use. And ultimately in the community brainstorm, what we talked about was kind of a tiered approach for change. There's the individual level of what am I using on a daily basis, and how can I shift my use of single-use plastics so as to, on a personal level, reduce my impact. And that looks like getting, wooden toothbrushes, which actually are increasingly affordable. On Amazon, I found bamboo toothbrushes for about $10 for a pack of 8, I think it was, but they averaged to $1 and some change per toothbrush. Amazon is, I'm not promoting Amazon, that's just, that's just to put that out there. They're getting more affordable. And cloth bags, getting cloth or mesh reusable produce bags where you take your own bags to the grocery store, and instead of using the plastic ones provided, you can put your produce into that. Getting silk floss that is in a glass container instead of a plastic floss in a plastic container. Using glass Tupperware. Using beeswax food wraps or silicone bags instead of plastic bags that are reusable. Metal cups. So these were some of the ideas that we came up with for individual consumers. And I'm sure that together we can come up with more as more and more people begin putting their minds onto this. The next kind of level that we discussed in terms of making change is not reflected on this slide. This is just more options, more ideas for what you as an individual or you as a consumer can do to make change. But in terms of the tiers that we discussed in the community brainstorm, there's the individual, and then there's community, so calling local businesses and restaurants and saying, I love your food, I love your business, and I really, really strongly encourage and request that you switch from using styrofoam or plastic in your to-go containers and you start using, something that's biodegradable, something that won't be around in 400 years. Calling, the Chamber of Commerce, calling, and just beginning to make your voice heard as a consumer and make those requests be heard. Work with local organizations such as Greenworks around reducing plastic initiatives in the community. And then again, kind of zooming out to more of a state level for our community, calling your representatives and your senators and saying, these big corporations, I really want them to be held accountable for the plastics they produce. Or these businesses in my community, this is an issue that I feel strongly about, and these are the steps I would love to see you as a political representative take. And then on a bigger scale, trying to figure out how to encourage big businesses, big corporations, to take ownership. And part of that was through calling representatives, and part of that is through choosing where you buy from. So one of our folks in the community brainstorm talked about not buying sodas or not buying from specific companies that advocate producing millions of plastic bottles, and figuring out how to bring awareness to that. So here's some more ideas around individual change and individual shifts. Everything from trying to use matches instead of disposable Bic lighters, to asking your local grocer to take the plastic container from you when you're grocery shopping so that you're not taking it home, it gets recycled immediately. Using cloth diapers instead of disposable diapers if that's possible. Making fresh squeezed juice instead of buying it in the plastic bottles. And getting a razor with replaceable blades instead of a disposable one. So just some ideas, and there's many more here that you can look through on the PDF that I'll upload to the website. Here's even more that I put together. And I think that it's really important, because we had this come up in our brainstorm, to, if you are not in a place where you can replace what you own with non-plastic alternatives, that does not mean that there aren't things you can start doing right now. In terms of calling businesses or calling representatives, in terms of just bringing more awareness to what you already have and reusing it with more intention maybe. Reusing the plastic bags for groceries or for produce from the market, maybe washing them out and just taking the same ones back. And if you can't, and at this point in your life, buy a cloth alternative. I think that this is again where it's helpful to use the health coaching model and say, what is within my control? It might not be some of these ideas, but there might be other ideas that you do have the capacity to do. And why is that important to you? And when can you start doing them? And how do you want to set a goal that's specific for it? So something that I went over with our folks was, again, the anatomy of a habit. Looking at most habits, you can kind of break down a pattern to the behavior where it's a cue, the thing that triggers the action, and then action, and then a reward of some kind. And so, for instance, going out to dinner, you get in the car, you drive to the restaurant, you order a drink. And that normal sequence, you might just get in the car, go to the restaurant, order the drink, and not think about taking a little bag that has your own to-go containers that are not made out of plastic, taking your own metal straw instead of using the plastic one at the restaurant. And so this is, again, where you can really shift based on where you're at in your life, how you want that to look. So you could, again, pack a bag with to-go containers and with a cloth napkin and with a metal straw. Or you could make a note or somehow begin to trigger for yourself that when you get to the restaurant and when you sit down at the table, you want to ask for no straw so that one isn't put down on the table. This slide is around setting goals. This is the model that I use in my health coaching and that many people use, personal trainers, life coaches, for how to set an effective goal that is a SMART goal. So it's an acronym for specific, measurable, action-oriented, realistic, and time-oriented. And the reason we want a goal that follows this rubric is that it helps to take a desire for change and put it down so that it's specific. You know exactly what you're doing. It's based on action so that you can track what you did or didn't do. It's, again, measurable so that you can measure what you did or didn't do. It's realistic. It's within your reach. Even hopefully it's a reasonable stretch, but not unreasonable. You're not setting yourself up for failure. And it's time-oriented. So it's a lot easier, I think, mentally for many people to say, okay, in 3 months, this is where I want to be. And these are the action steps I'm going to take to get there. And then you can break that down. You can figure out how you're going to measure it and be accountable to yourself. And if you're specific, then you don't leave a lot of room for a sense of failure if you do the thing that you said you're going to do. So an example of a SMART goal with regards to plastic use might be, in 3 months, I will have a wooden spoon, I will have silk floss, and I will have a bag in the car with my own to-go containers. Those are action-based, 1 month, so by September the 22nd, and time-oriented, realistic. Those are 3 things, but they're all within reason, action-oriented, and specific. So then what I would do is write that down, because if you write down a goal, it helps to make it more concrete. Keith Wimsett of Inspire Personal Fitness, he's a personal trainer here in town and owns a gym, says that if you write down a goal, it increases the chances you're going to be able to follow through on it by 47% for most people. So write it down. And then I'm going to say, okay, what's my action plan? When am I going to get the wooden spoons? Where am I going to get them? Am I going to get them from? Where am I going to get the silk floss? What am I going to do with the plastic floss I have? And you begin kind of breaking it down, and then you put it on a calendar, and you say, this week I'm doing this. The second week I'm doing this. The third week I'm doing this. And that way you have a plan that you can follow through on. These are my sources. I went everywhere looking for information on this and trying to find as much as possible unbiased information, which I did my best. But I went everywhere from the National Institute for Health to National Geographic to a census.gov website, looking at some information there, articles in different newspapers, the Green Education Foundation, the World Health Organization, and more. And I want to thank you. Thank you for your interest in this topic. Thank you for being willing to kind of bring curiosity and time, and hopefully you can take some of what I presented here and you can incorporate it into your lifestyle and make some changes. Again, thank you.